There's something happening in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania that most Americans will never hear about. Not because it is hidden in some remote corner of the country, not because it requires special equipment or a government clearance to understand, but because the people who profit from your ignorance have spent decades making sure you never ask the right questions about something as simple, as ancient, and as essential as the water you drink every single day. Think about that for a moment. Water. The one thing your body cannot go 3 days without. The one thing every living creature on this planet shares an absolute need for. And somehow, in the wealthiest nation in human history, you're paying $60, $80, sometimes $120 a month for something that falls out of the sky for free. You're buying it in plastic bottles that leach chemicals into it. You are trusting that the system treating it before it reaches your tap is doing everything it promises to do. And in the back of your mind, if you're being honest with yourself, you're not entirely sure that it is. Now consider this. There are families in rural Ohio and Pennsylvania who have been drinking water cleaner than what flows through most hospital filtration systems. They pay roughly $2 a month for it. Some of them pay nothing at all. Their system fits inside a wooden barrel in a basement. It was built from materials that cost less than a fast food lunch. And it has been running, without electricity, without replacement cartridges, without a service contract or a monthly subscription, for generations. These are Amish families. And what they know about water, what they have quietly preserved and passed down through kitchens and barns and winter evenings around a table, is a body of knowledge that the modern world did not lose by accident. You may have grown up hearing the word Amish and picturing horse-drawn buggies, plain clothing, and a lifestyle deliberately removed from modern convenience. And all of that is true. But what most people miss is that the Amish relationship with the physical world, with soil and wood and water and fire, is not primitive. It is precise. It is the result of centuries of observation, of trial and error, of keeping what works and discarding what does not, entirely independent of what anyone was trying to sell them. When you remove the profit motive from the way a community solves its problems, what you're left with is engineering. Real engineering. Quiet, unpretentious, and ruthlessly effective. The water purification method the Amish use is built on 4 layers, and each layer is doing something specific, something that a chemistry textbook would explain in clinical terms, but that a grandmother in Strasburg, Pennsylvania would describe to you in about 40 seconds while pouring you a glass. The first layer is coarse sand, roughly 4 inches deep. Its job is mechanical. It catches the visible debris, the particles large enough to see, things that have no business traveling further down the system. The second layer is fine sand, 6 to 8 inches deep. This layer is doing the work the first one cannot. The invisible particles, the suspended silt, the microscopic debris that would pass right through the coarser material above it. By the time water has moved through these 2 layers, it has already traveled further than most municipal pre-treatment processes take it. The third layer is where the chemistry begins. Activated charcoal, made from hardwood, burned slowly in a low-oxygen fire, is one of the most powerful natural filtration materials on Earth. The Amish make it themselves from oak and maple scraps, a process that requires nothing more than a controlled burn and patience. The porous structure of the charcoal, riddled with microscopic chambers and passages, acts like an enormous surface area compressed into a small volume. As water moves through it, chlorine molecules are trapped, pesticides are trapped, organic chemical compounds are stripped out, heavy metals are captured. The process is called adsorption, not absorption. The contaminants do not dissolve into the charcoal. They bond to its surface at a molecular level. They stay there. And the water moves on, cleaner than it has been since it fell from a cloud. The fourth layer is crushed limestone or gravel. It does 2 things simultaneously. It provides structural support for the layers above it, preventing the system from compacting and clogging over time. And it gently raises the pH of the water. Rainwater is naturally slightly acidic. That metallic, sharp edge you sometimes taste in collected water is a pH problem. The limestone corrects it, not through chemistry you need a lab to understand, but through the same geological process that has been softening and mineralizing groundwater for millions of years as it moves through rock. What you have when these 4 layers are working together is a filtration system that addresses physical contamination, chemical contamination, and mineral balance all at once, with no moving parts. No electricity, no filters to replace every 3 months at $30 a piece, and it fits in a 55-gallon barrel. You might be wondering why, if this is so effective, you have never heard of it before. You might be thinking that if it really worked this well, someone would be selling it. That is precisely the point. Someone cannot sell it. There is no patent on sand. There's no subscription model for charcoal you make yourself in your backyard. The profit margin on sunlight and gravity is exactly 0. And in an economy built around the idea that every solution to every problem must be purchased, a solution that costs $2 and lasts a generation simply does not fit the model. There is a document trail here that is worth understanding. In 1936, during the Great Depression, an agricultural researcher named John Snow not the historical epidemiologist, but a different man entirely, published a pamphlet titled Rural Water Sanitation Methods. It was distributed for free across rural Pennsylvania, printed in the hundreds of thousands, handed out at county extension offices and farm supply stores and community meetings. It described, in plain language, the exact filtration method that Amish communities had been using for over a century, and it put that knowledge into the hands of anyone who needed it, which during the Depression was nearly everyone. By 1955, that pamphlet had been quietly removed from circulation. By the 1970s, a copy was nearly impossible to find outside of a university archive. Think carefully about the timing of that disappearance. Municipal water infrastructure was being expanded across America throughout the 1950s and 1960s. The Federal Safe Drinking Water Act was passed in 1974. In that same year, sales of home water filtration systems began climbing at 12 to 15% annually. By 1990, the bottled water industry in the United States was worth over $2 billion. Today, it is worth over $45 billion. The knowledge that water could be purified for pennies, using materials available on any farm, faded from public awareness right at the moment that water became a commodity someone could sell back to you. That is not a coincidence. It is an economic pattern. And recognizing it is the first step toward opting out of it. But there is one piece of the system that even the most well-researched modern guides miss. The Amish do not simply collect rainwater and run it through their filter. They understand something about rainwater that most people never consider. When rain first strikes your roof, it is not clean. It is carrying everything that has accumulated up there since the last storm. Bird droppings, dust, pollen, agricultural residue carried by the wind, exhaust particulates. The first 10 to 15 gallons of rainfall off a typical residential roof are some of the most contaminated water you will encounter. And if you pour that water directly into your filtration system, you are loading your filter with a concentrated dose of the very things you're trying to remove. The Amish solution is called a first flush diverter. It is a vertical pipe attached to the downspout of a gutter with a small valve at the bottom. When rain begins, the water from the roof fills this vertical pipe first. Only after the pipe is completely full does the overflow travel into the collection system. The first flush, the dirtiest water, sits isolated in that pipe. After the rain stops, you open the valve at the bottom and drain it into the garden, where it feeds the soil instead of your filter. The system resets itself automatically for the next storm. This single device, built from 4-inch PVC pipe for about $8 in materials, does more for the actual quality of your collected water than almost any filtration technology you could purchase. And almost nobody outside of Amish communities uses it, because nobody is selling it. Now, once your water has passed through the 4-layer system, the Amish apply one final technique, a finishing step that was formally documented in a 1974 agricultural extension publication, though the practice itself predates that document by well over a century. It is called solar finishing, and understanding why it works will change how you think about technology, simplicity, and the relationship between them. You take your filtered water, already stripped of chemical contaminants and physical debris, and you pour it into clear glass bottles. Not plastic. Glass. You fill them completely, leaving no air gap at the top, and you cap them tightly. Then you lay them on their sides on a piece of corrugated metal roofing in direct sunlight for 6 to 8 hours. The ultraviolet radiation from the sun penetrates the glass and enters the water. It disrupts the cellular machinery of any microorganism still present at the molecular level. The corrugated metal beneath the bottles acts as a reflector, essentially doubling the UV exposure on the underside of the glass. After a full summer day in direct sunlight, what you have is water that is microbiologically sterile. Not approximately sterile, not mostly clean, genuinely measurably sterile, at a level that laboratory testing confirms. The World Health Organization studied this method extensively in the early 2000s, confirmed its effectiveness, and formally recommended it for communities in the developing world that lacked access to municipal water treatment infrastructure. They called it solar disinfection, abbreviated as SODIS. They presented it as an innovation. What they did not acknowledge was that families in rural Pennsylvania had been doing it on the back porches of farmhouses still standing today since the 1850s. The technology was not new. The institutional recognition of it was. When you combine the 4-layer filter with the solar finishing step, you are stacking 2 completely different purification mechanisms against 2 completely different categories of contamination. The filter removes the physical and chemical threats. The sunlight removes the biological ones. By the time water has passed through both stages, it has met or exceeded the purity standards that hospitals apply to water used in sterile medical procedures. Hospitals achieve that standard by spending tens of thousands of dollars on reverse osmosis systems, deionization tanks, and specialized ultraviolet sterilization equipment. The Amish achieve it with a wooden barrel, some sand, some charcoal, a piece of corrugated roofing, and a clear day. You may feel a kind of quiet frustration starting to build as you take all of this in. That is a natural response. Because what this knowledge represents is not just a more efficient way to filter water. It is evidence of something larger. It is evidence that the gap between what we are told we need and what we actually need, between the complexity we are sold and the simplicity that actually works, is in many cases not an accident of ignorance. It is a consequence of the fact that simplicity, when it works, cannot be monetized. The grandmother in Lancaster County who poured a visiting stranger a glass of water last spring, water that tasted of absolutely nothing, no chlorine, no metal, no plastic, no treatment, just water as water was, before it became a product, said something that is worth sitting with. She said that people have been taught to fear the things that are free, that they trust the label on a bottle because someone put it there, that they do not trust the rain because no one can sell them the rain. That is not cynicism, that is observation. And it is the kind of observation that only becomes visible when you step back far enough from the system you are living inside to actually see its shape. You do not need to move to Lancaster County. You do not need to build a barn or learn to make your own charcoal in a clay pot, though that is genuinely simpler than it sounds. What you need is the knowledge itself, because the knowledge is the tool. A 55-gallon food-grade barrel, a spigot, 4 materials you can buy at any hardware store or collect from a creek bed and a fire, a length of PVC pipe, and a clear glass bottle. That is the entire physical requirement. The rest is understanding, which you now have. If this is the kind of thinking that resonates with you, the recovery of practical knowledge that was allowed to fade, not because it stopped working, but because it stopped being profitable, then you are already in the right place. There's far more of this where it came from. Subscribe to Secret Fix Vault and stay close. Because what the Amish preserved about water is only the beginning of what they preserved about living well on almost nothing. And all of it, every layer of it, is waiting to be recovered.